Yeah.
So, I think I'm looking at about an hour.
Okay.
Should be somewhat sweet. Maybe not too short.
You don't need to do anything for this, or
No, just resounding woos and applause.
blows and applause when it's time. You kind of look back there now whenever I need to.
Thank you. Yeah, otherwise I think I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
How are you?
Hello, Christopher. How are ya?
Oh, I'm right.
We're so excited for this tonight.
Who's excited? Are you excited?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I understand everything that IT is saying.
Just kind of let you know.
I'm not the most IT literate. I mean, I know what you
Tell me when you're ready. Good to go?
I think we're good to go.
Awesome. Good evening. I'd like to call this work session for September the 12th, 2022 to order. I'd like to acknowledge the council members present. Councilmember Christine Hall. Councilmember Lee Hills. And Councilmember Mike Palermo. Please don't do that. You will absolutely throw me off forever. Also in attendance is City Administrator Randy Knighton, City Attorney David Davidson, and City Clerk Marley Press. Today's topic is the IT Strategic Plan, which is an action item in the City of Roswell's Comprehensive Strategic Plan. The IT Strategic Plan was put together in partnership with a third-party consultant, utilizing internal surveys, IT input, and the consultant's depth of knowledge to develop the plan. The plan defines the tasks to be completed by the IT division over the next 5 years to help position the IT division as a better strategic partner. IT's aims for this work session is to get input and buy-in from the council on the plan's objectives. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Christopher Zach, the IT director, to make the presentation. Welcome, Chris. The show is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. I will try to be conscious of time. I think I've given you an abridged version of this, and we'll try to abridge it even more. So I'm just going to kick it off. So a quick outline of the meeting is, first I'm going to go into the purpose of what this plan is for and what the purpose of this meeting is. Then I'm going to summarize the plan and give an overview. I believe I'm going to, for time, if we have it, I'll go through a little bit of the security stuff, but I think we could skip that if needed. And then I want to cover some other strategic initiatives, and I'll talk about that why in a second. So to talk about the history of this plan, really what the purpose of this plan was, is that this was an item in the previous 2021-2025 city-wide strategic plan. I actually noticed it is no longer part of the new version, but I'm here to complete the task that was put before me. This was started off, is one of the first projects I was assigned when I got here, so it kind of carried on from my predecessor. The funding was already found, and we engaged in a procurement process to get a consultant to help us develop this plan that started in spring 2021. I think they got selected in fall, worked through the winter and a little bit into Q1 to develop this plan. So the kind of high in the pie sky idea behind what the purpose of this plan was to identify city strategy and goals, identify current state of IT, and then create a roadmap to bring them together. To assess our security status and disaster readiness, and then provide recommendations, and then to assess department structural weaknesses and provide recommendations. And I want to call out that this is a plan and not an assessment, so the objective here is to look for improvement, and I'll leave it at that. Next is the actual value of this plan, so this is kind of pulling the curtain back, and I'll speak a little candidly of this, is, I looked through my material quite a bit, and I kind of found that the material was a little bit boring. So I tried to put this presentation together to align it to kind of the meat of what we're doing here. And so to that point, I typically think the value of a strategic plan for me is to go to you guys and say, hey, I want your buy-in for this because this is going to become a budget proposal in the future, and let's argue or talk about it now, so when it comes up, I already have that buy-in. And for you guys, it's to hold me accountable. So there's things on here that I say, hey, I think this is what we should do, and you guys go, yep, that's a good idea. And then in a couple of years, you could say, hey, why haven't you done that yet? So I think that's really the value here. I also want to call out that this plan is a baseline. If we are truly aligned with the IT strategy to the city's goal and aspirations, we expect to achieve much more than this has been proposed. I also want to comment, we did this with a vendor. A vendor has to sign off on this. So by the nature of that, they're probably not going to say anything too risky or too aligned or too specific, because if they're going to sign off on something, they want to make sure it works, and they don't want their name if it doesn't. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, next is the presentation objectives. So why are we here? We're going to present the plan findings in a way that we believe are relevant to you. This is, I think, a 47-page document. We've summarized it. That's what this presentation will be at a very high level. I don't think I left anything out, but I kind of highlighted the things I thought were important, and we'll tell you why I glossed over the other stuff. I want to present the findings provided as the vendor. I try not to influence too much. Otherwise, this would just be my strategic plan, and then what's the point of getting a third party? I'll provide my responses when I think applicable, so there's things I disagree with on here, but I want to present both visions. Then present an overview of IT management, present principles and decision-making. This is more for the initiatives outside of this plan. introduce non-planned strategic initiatives just so you guys are aware of some things we're thinking about, problems within the city that we're looking for solutions for, and just know that it's on our radar. And then ask for feedback and recommendations on all items presented in this presentation. And as far as this presentation goes, I'm good if you guys interrupt me. In fact, I'd prefer it that if there's anything you have question on, just stop me in the middle and we'll discuss it. Otherwise, I'll just run through, and if you have questions at the end, we could get there. All right, so I'm going into, again, this is going to be a very high-level summary of the presentation. Again, I'm trying to make this relevant to you guys. So I'm glossing over things that I don't think are important, and I'll at least try to call out why. So the first couple pages of this document cover vision statement and mission statement, and I decided not to present that because at the end of the day, if the servers crash, my mission statement doesn't matter. So I thought it's not that important. It's important to us, but I'm not sure if it's that important to you guys. However, I do want to talk about guiding principles because this is a little bit more tangible. This is how we prioritize things. So the original document presented, this is how the vendor ordered the priority. On the right is how I ordered them. So I always put stability first, then security, then cost, then ease of use. Stability before security because security is really trying to protect stability. They go almost hand in hand, but if I'm picking one over the other, I'm putting stability for that reason, although security is a close second. I won't go much explanation, just want to tell you how I tell my team to prioritize things. Next couple pages cover a commitment to presenting how the strategic plan is going. We actually had a presentation in February that aligns with this. I think that'll be our go forward. Every year we'll have a presentation with you guys to present how we're aligning to the strategic plan, our strategic initiatives outside of the plan. And the next couple pages are referencing other things we'll present within that February presentation. Next is our measurables for success, at least with the strategic plan. So in February, when I present how the strategic plan is going, these are going to be some of the criteria we use to tell you how we're doing. Next is project success deliverables. So in line with our strategic plan, part of our February presentation is that we'll give you a summary of all our completed projects, backlog projects, and scope projects as part of the review in February. And additionally, we're going to commit, when applicable, to use these criteria to show you how those projects are doing. I think some of those won't always be applicable. For example, just the way we approach projects. I think user adoption is something I expect and hope to be almost 100%. So that's not always going to be a criteria because I think if we do everything correct on the front end, then it should be 100%. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. The next pages cover our current state and our desired state. This is where the vendor viewed us and where they thought we're going to be. So we actually combined page 9 and page 23, which is 9 was the current and then 23 was the future. So the vendor defined us to be in this trusted operator category, which essentially means that we're very good operationally. We solve operational issues. We have a very strong help desk, and that the target of this strategic plan is to become a business partner at the end of it. We have at the top is this innovator, which is not something I think I see the vision of this division as being. I think Roswell is known for its award-winning Rec and Parks Department and for best-in-class public safety. And I believe IT should always be considered a support vertical to those functions in the rest of the city. I don't ever think we're going to be first forward in Roswell, and I don't think we should try to be. Sir.
So, yeah, can you elaborate on that, on taking kind of the innovation piece off the table?
So taking the innovation piece off the table?
Yes, it's my belief we should not pursue innovator status.
So where should we try to be? Or are you saying why shouldn't we?
Yeah, just kind of give me your sense of ownership on that. Like, as you went through this with the vendor, they put innovator in there, right? And you said, not so much.
Well, that's more of their jargon. So you'll see, at least in their findings, they're not saying we're trying to be an innovator in the next 5 years. But I think if we went back to 5 years and just kind of the nature is a vendor will probably always recommend you try to get to the next level. And that's where I'm saying it's there. They're not telling us to be there, but I at least want to call out of, as far as my vision, I don't ever see us being an innovator in the city. I don't think our verticals are such that we want IT to be the first and foremost in the city. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. So let me roll back to start off with. The vendor says that we're going to be, right now we're a trusted operator, which means we're good operationally. And then they're saying at the end of this, we want you to be a business partner, which means you're more strategic. And what that means to me is that instead of just fixing people's problems reactively, we're working to proactively solve them. And then some of the findings in this, and it gets a little bit more tangible later, we'll say if we do this, then we will better facilitate that strategic need. My specific comment is the vendor provided this diagram that shows these different levels, and the highest level is innovator. And I want to call out I don't think we'll ever try to get into that position, because I think that is essentially being a leader in the city, and I think the city has to balance its priorities, and I think part of that comes from funding and how we choose to do things, and if we were to align this idea to other departments, we can only have maybe 2 or 3 departments in the city who are innovator level due to those priorities, and I don't want IT to be one of those. Does that make sense?
It does. But my question, Chris, to you would be, sometimes innovation is the thing that changes the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, in terms of delivering a more effective, efficient government, right, that sometimes you leapfrog
Mm-hmm.
through innovation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're not just say, hey, I've got my silo, and I got all these support apparatuses that I'm responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
What's the quality of the work? How far ahead are we in doing that? What resources do we have? How good are we at that? How reliable, et cetera, et cetera. Huge pieces, right? You said it earlier, right? Stability and security.
Mm-hmm.
But the next piece is sometimes the innovation piece is the piece that gets you to the next leg, particularly in technology, right? Where you have to leapfrog to be ahead in stability and security. So I know we may be talking semantics here, but I think you've already demonstrated some of this.
Yep. I think you're correct in that it is semantical, and that they just chose, this is their jargon, that they said the highest tier is being an innovator. And I just represent that to mean this is, you're a leader pillar in the city, and priorities go behind you. And to your point, I agree with you. We need to be innovative. We are innovative, and I might call that strategic initiatives, and we do have some of that at the end. But I totally agree. I think it's jargon. I think we have alignment on we need to be innovative.
Well, I will tell you from my own experience, working in corporate cultures, some that were innovative and some that were not, right? And some would said, look, we're just going to block and tackle.
Uh-huh.
That's what we do. We block and tackle. We're stable and we're secure. And look, there's a place, I'm not demeaning that, but I don't think it's our vision for the city that, yes, we have to be stable and secure. We have to block and tackle first and foremost. But there are things sometimes that when you choose to be more innovative, right, that you actually deliver better results ultimately for your stakeholders, i.e. our residents. And so for me, it's just from my own experience, having been in the corporate world, seeing sometimes people that get too comfortable in the lanes, that you end up getting blown up and getting surpassed, and wondering why. As well, it's because other people are continuing to innovate. So that would be, I guess, for me, it's a pressure point.
Understood. I think when we get to the end of this presentation, that concept will come up again, and I think we'll have perfect alignment at that point.
Okay.
To your point, I think, to me, we are probably arguing semantics on how they choose to have done their listing, but by the end of this, I think you'll go, okay, I get, we have alignment there.
And your point on bullet 4, which is well taken, and I think everyone is in alignment with your thinking. Look, I believe IT should be considered a support vertical rather than its own individual pillar. And
Right.
that makes perfect sense. It is at the end of the day, and sometimes IT, like HR, right, can become an individual pillar, and that usually doesn't benefit the organization. So that's a good point.
Just a quick comment. Those could almost be reversed, with innovator where business partner is, and business partner at the top, because you need the innovation to be the strategic partner and help drive that organization to those levels, maybe.
Yeah, and I think we're probably all aligned in semantical on what the terminology is, and by the end, we could have the discussion again if you don't have that same feeling. But I think we'll get there. Cool. Good here? Any other? Very good. All right, this is our current org chart. There's not much here. It was just presented. There's more people stuff later. And then I put a picture of the IT director just in case you forgot what he looked like. So.
Move that immediately.
Page 12 covers the results of the surveys. So these are surveys that went out internally, and based off of what the results were, it came up with industry standard. This is a little bit more of a benchmark, but again, this is not an assessment in a strategic plan. So there was asked that people be more critical, because the end result of this, it tells us how to do better. With that being said, just high level, as kind of presented before, we're very good on these service desk work order operationally. Some of the places for opportunities are business applications, IT policies, which I've talked about before, and then IT security, which we've made a lot of strides in that over the last year, but that's kind of what the strategic plan is working to fill in.
Chris, is the 5% or the 2% below industry on devices, is that primarily Councilmember Hills and myself?
100%, 100%. 110% actually. We doubled your score. I'm just kidding. Any thoughts here? I'm going to skip to the next one. This is the breakdown by departments for the scoring. If you have any comments, we can go into it more.
Yeah, I don't see, yeah. Where is city council and mayor right there? I mean, you got like about a 12% satisfaction. You put us up there, Chris. Oh, that's green. Look at this. Is like a front, like you're such a good salesman. Like you just front loaded all these safe places. Put council member, you put each council member, and then mayor, and like you get like 12% satisfaction.
Sure, this is a strategic plan. This is not an operational plan. We're trying to keep it focused on the good of the city, okay? All right, I'm going to skip. We're good here. All right, pages 13 to 15 allocate our, say, staffing levels and how we allocate our time. I put this bullet point because I'd forget to say it. This doesn't allocate like how they spend their time, but what areas they put their time into. So, you know, it will total up all back to a service area. A service area being infrastructure or operations. And so the strengths kind of represented in this section is the majority of staff time is dedicated to infrastructure and operations, and opportunities we have is only 3% of staff time devoted to security, staffing level below industry standard, and then IT director management load above industry average, which means I have too many direct reports. Good. Pages 16
Well, that sounds self-serving. We need to vet this. But you and the vendor put that one together. Hey, I got too many direct reports. I need to front load this thing.
Hey, I told you in the beginning what the objective was. I'm being very straightforward about that, but you know, it's part of the plan. All right, the next pages are more about process. I won't cover too much because a lot of the concepts get covered more tangibly in the future. So this is kind of how they put together some of the more tangible things that'll come up in the future. I'm just going to kind of gloss over it. Here's the SWOT analysis. I'll skip this for time. I'm not sure if you guys want to quickly review or if there's anything you want me to call out, but otherwise I'll skip for time. I think it's...
Call something out.
So on the strengths, we have vendor management. What I'd love to talk about, my vendor management strategy. I think that could be a whole discussion in itself. But I do think that is something I take particular pride in, and I think that's where a lot of the cost savings I'm able to report comes from. And then on the weaknesses, we have a lot of it's staffing related, so no bench, high user support ratio, but you kind of already know that's going to come from a plan like this. Opportunities, I put routine processes. This is something where, we're very good operationally, and I've talked about this before. We're trying to develop these routine processes and these routine things that we do that just kind of ensure the future stability and success of our department. Division. Cloud-based software applications, you'll see that a lot when we kind of get into the tangible task of there's a big push by the vendor to recommend we move everything to the cloud. And then, yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else I'll specifically call out, but if you have anything.
Well, you address these, will you address any, I know this is the SWOT side. Are you going to come back later on outside of SWOT and address any of this? For example, stuff that you have direct ability to affect, and stuff you do not. Like I'm looking at threats, like lack of succession planning, right? Obviously that's something you can affect.
Correct. Right,
industry salaries versus government to some degree. I'm not so sure what COVID agent 000 is.
It's out of office. So again, this was done sometime last year.
Council buy-in and funding, right? That's outsourcing PPP. Supply chain issues, malware, ransom attack. That would be interesting, actually, to hear about that. Mm-hmm. And security. Mm-hmm. But those are not all equally weighted, obviously, right?
Correct. So I'm more than happy to speak about anything in particular. I think some of the security stuff definitely gets covered in the future. There is a concept that comes up later about working from home as a kind of way to address the industry salaries versus government. I'm not sure if that's a discussion you want to have today, because that probably goes beyond my scope, but that's at kind of a low level. There is an ask or a push of a lot of people working to be able to work from home. And I think one of the things as a public sector entity we could offer is better benefits. And that's something that, we do have policies in place for that. But I do think people are seeing that when we are competitively competing against the private sector, that is a benefit they could offer that we can't offer in the same way. So I do think that is probably a higher level than me kind of thought that the city needs to talk about. Now, where it's kind of specific in IT is it's more standard in our industry that people get to work from home. It's almost a guaranteed at this point. Again, we do have policies for it, but I think the kind of ask or aggression is to make it more formalized and official, where right now it's a yearly review, and it's like, this is the future and we're competing against the private sector. We might need to look at this being standardized in our HR, but again, probably broader conversation than today. So yeah, to your point, some of these will get addressed later. Some of them probably won't. It's hard for me to say at this point. I've kind of covered the ones I think. But maybe we come back to this if you feel like there is something we should talk about more. Good? Okay. All right, I'm going to skip. All right, this is where the plan gets a little bit more tangible. So we get into goals that are represented by objectives, and all the objectives have tasks. I'm going to skip to the next because it'll cover these same concepts. So this is kind of the actual tangible what we're going to do. So this is a little bit much easier to digest, much less high level. So the first goal is to be a provider of reliable and consistent IT services. The key objective is to improve core IT processes. So the first task is to complete and communicate an IT strategy document. So that's why we're here today. We've got this strategic plan. We're talking to you guys about it, getting buy-in. And then, if you guys are good, at least to some level, we're going to work towards completing this over the next 5 years. Next is adopt and implement an IT governance framework. Essentially what this means is a framework is kind of a checklist of items that if we complete, we've now adopted the framework. It's very high level, but it just kind of pushes us to doing best practices and making sure we're doing best practices. Next is implement project management methodology, which I actually think we're pretty good with internally. We have a good project lifecycle and management within our division, but I think kind of a bigger objective to meet here is there's a city project management need and then IT's needs, and the city views project management at a much higher level. Their projects are typically multi-years, while ours are multi-months, and I think there will need to be a consolidation of those two to make sure we're in alignment with them, or there's kind of defined processes on how we operate. Next is implement a service catalog with service level agreements. So the idea behind here is if you put a ticket with a problem in, we're saying a specific time to complete and holding our staff accountable to that. I will say I do differ a little bit here in how I approach this, and this is a good place to get feedback. And that when I was more operational, I had a director who, instead of setting times for completion, set times for response, which ultimately I think as someone who has an issue, that's more important as long as you're being communicated with. And also it's a lot of process overhead to try to define a problem in a specific time to complete it and hold people accountable. And to kind of go into the weeds of that is if you come in and your computer's broken, one person it might take us 10 minutes to fix, and another person it might take us 24 hours depending on the complexity of the problem. So it's very hard, I think, to try to define those SLAs and keep people accountable because there's always going to be weird exceptions unless you're doing a lot of process overhead to do that. So my approach is we tackle by response time. My team comes up with when they think they complete it, and then they're responsible to communicate updates and changes to that timeline.
Why not have both?
I think what will end up happening, and I've seen this before, is if I put a criteria of this is when you need to do something and someone can't achieve it, they'll get frustrated because it could be unfair.
That's not what I mean. Why not keep the response time, right, and the completion time? Why not have both of those?
It's in the light of if my team defines the completion time when they get a problem, then yes. If it is, I am predetermining a completion time for a problem that comes in, I think that causes a lot of challenges because it will be impossible for every situation to be correctly assessed for how long it should take.
So Christopher, you're suggesting something I'm not. I'm just suggesting have 2 evaluation times, right? Have a response time and a completion time.
Mm-hmm.
You can back into, once you start looking at the data on the completion times and saying, all right, some of these completion times obviously are logical and some of them are not. But let's dig into why do some of these make sense and some of them don't. But the first thing is you want data on both, don't you? Want how quickly do we respond? And then quickly, how long does it take us to complete the project? Don't we?
We have the data on both, but I want to hold my people accountable to the response because that's something they can control. And to your point, there are times where if it's clean cut, it's fair to say, hey, if this comes in, we know how long this task could take. We could set that criteria, and if you don't meet it, then I could hold you accountable. But I think in general, the complexity of issues that come in would either require a lot of front end to define each of those timelines to make it fair and hold them accountable. But I don't think that's worthwhile.
Well, I can tell you right now, as a user, I'm an Apple user, and I have a project that's been going on for 4 months, right, that's not completed. And inside of that is a lot of intricacies of why it's not completed, right? But what I would want to know if I were on the other side, if I were on the Apple side, how much time is that? It's because the individual who's responsible to handling my project, how many times is it because they're overloaded in work, or they have family issues, or et cetera, which all adds to the timeline, right? Or how many things do I learn because of the complexity of the issues that were encountered that might lead me into insight about other issues that I may not see in a silo?
I'm aligned with you on the first point. I'm trying to figure out your...
Well, sometimes something takes longer because, like you said, there's complexity to it. And you get into it, and studying the complexity of it leads you down the pathway of saying, we didn't encounter that here, but we did encounter that here. And it should have taken that amount of time rather than this amount of time.
So I think when you're describing your issue, the thing that frustrates you, and you can correct me, is if you're not made aware of when the timeline changes. And so my proposal would be when a ticket or an issue comes in, that it's my agent's responsibility to define how long they think it's going to take versus a system defining how long it thinks it's going to take.
I know, but you have to, at some level, you have to have incentives for time. If you don't have incentives for time, you get punished conversely. Have you ever had a contract with a lawyer, i.e., with all due respect to Mr. Davidson, who didn't have a timeline for completion? You ever see what happened to the cost, the escalation, and the timeline of that project?
Agreed. I understand. I'm not sure if it's analogous, in my opinion.
Understand, it's not. But if there's not a clarity about how long something's going to take, and there's not accountability about that, right? How do you know someone's doing well against versus someone else?
Right. And my approach is I trust my team to be able to represent how long they think something should take, and I could hold them accountable when they don't meet that.
As an organization, though, Chris, I appreciate that, because trust at the end of the day is a big part of leading people, right? But at some point, I've got to have accountability measures in place organizationally, right? If I go to the residents and say, well, I trust Chris, they can say, that's great. Chris is awesome. He's a great dude. He's innovative, he's smart, and he gets a lot done. But they say, well, why did it take so long to get such and such done? I've got to be able to give a feasible response.
Right, and that's where, in your analogy, what I would say my solution is, my job and what you would hold me accountable to is I have to update that person frequently on the status of the project. And if the timeline I said would get done by changes, I need to communicate that. And if there are multiple changes, that's what it holds people accountable for. So at a high level, what I want to see is people are being responded to and updated on status changes, and people are made aware. And I want to trust my people to know, and they will know better than me how long something should take. And the challenge I would have to what you're saying is I think the varying degrees of what could come in, it would take a lot of overhead on my time to try to define that. And then to your point, you would find variations that you could calculate, but I think that you're constantly chasing something that will never be perfect. And again, I could be convinced off of this, but I'm presenting kind of my view.
I am certainly not saying that I'm just saying that there are other IT organizations. I can tell you the IT organization that I'm probably most familiar with today, they are in the process of doing exactly that, because they understand that if they don't give accountability to us as licensees, right, that there's enough similarity in projects, right, that they have an accountability to us from a timeline perspective. So I don't know. I think inherently in any system, you have to build in levels of accountability that have that transparency to them to say, and like you said, if there's a outlier in that changes the dynamics, most people are reasonable and understand that. I don't think this is trying to create inflexibility, and just the opposite. But at some point, it can't just be a free-for-all system either.
I hear your feedback. I will seriously take it in consideration, and if I don't follow through with it, we'll have a follow-up conversation on why. Is that fair?
Chris, it's always fair when we talk.
Fair. Okay. All right, next one is create and implement change management process. The idea being whenever we make a change to the system that we have a formalized process for doing so. This is very critical when it comes to if we're updating a system that could have production impact, that we need to have a system in place. So that's the idea behind that one. Improve asset management practices and policies. We made some strides in here. This is kind of a high-level complex one. I won't go into it much more unless you want to talk about it, because I think it could be a pretty detailed conversation. Implement continual service improvement process. So this is consistently looking at both operations strategically, how we could do things better. To your point, a lot of that comes from the data we get from our operations desk, where we would see what issues are consistently coming up, what are the issues that are taking longer to solve, and coming up with more strategic, holistic solutions to those. Next key objective is focus on staff growth and retention, so implement a documented training program. We've made a lot of strides in this already. I don't want to say it's completed, because it's always kind of an evolving thing, but making sure our staff is informed and having a documented process to do so. Next, create a succession plan for critical staff position, and then work from home policies for IT staff to increase retention and recruitment. Good. All right, next key objective is to maintain up-to-date systems and applications. A lot of this is focusing on moving internal hosted applications to the cloud. So the first one is the Tyler ERP Pro Munis. This is our ERP system. So the vendor is recommending that we move this to the cloud version essentially this year. I differ greatly on this, and I'm going to cover this more in kind of our own strategic initiative. We'll go a little bit more detail. Next is Office 365 migration. I do think there's a lot of advantages we get from this, and I think I will be building the return on investment argument over the next several months, and then presenting this as a budget request in the next coming year. Next is moving Cad and Rms to the cloud. I think there was a budget request last year. There's also an attempt of kind of a strategic initiative we're doing on our own. We'll cover that in a little bit. Next is improve lifecycle management. So this is to make sure our hardware stays up to date and that we're placing it, so we never have hardware that could critically fail unexpected. Firewalls replacement, we've already completed this. We actually did this a little innovatively, where before we were paying for a firewall device that I think was about $1,000 to $2,000 a year at each of our remote locations. So I think there's about 8 or 9 of those. And this year we replaced them with a new device that both functions as a firewall, but also as a backup router. So if we are to lose internet connection, it will switch over to a wireless card, which took us from $2,000 a year to, I don't know, just the cost of the SIM card, which is $20 a month, so about $200, $300 a year. And then we also get the backup, which we didn't get before. Wireless access point replacement, this will be completed in Q1, so this one will be done soon. And then primary firewall replacement in fiscal year 27, which this will be a budget request. That is something we have to have, and you'll see it come up in the future. Next is improve our upgrade unsupported business applications. So VMware is what does our data backups. There'll be a request for that in fiscal year 24. and then upgrade Windows servers with unsupported operating systems. So this is constantly, we're upgrading our servers. We got funding for this in the last budget period, so that will definitely be completed.
I have a question. What do you mean by unsupported systems?
All software essentially now, I shouldn't say all, most software is done on a subscription, and Windows is a good example, where at some point they go, your version we're no longer going to create updates for, and so if there is something that comes out as a security concern, and this happens all the time, that they won't provide a solution to older software. So for example, Windows 7 is no longer supported, which means if they discover a bug where people could exploit it and get into a system, that Windows will not fix it because it's no longer supported.
How long do we go with unsupported systems?
Typically, we try to never have an unsupported systems, but we do have some legacy systems, and to migrate some systems is a big effort in order not to affect production. So we have a couple SQL servers that fall into that category, but there's nothing that is that if compromised would cause an issue. So
we don't have a policy on that?
Not as of today, but this is what we're working towards. The biggest part of this is first on the asset management and discovery side. And that took a lot of effort on our team to start doing and figure out what we had and where it was.
Councilmember Hills, are you suggesting something? Paul, you guys killed me. Unbelievable. Councilmember Hall, are you suggesting something?
I'm waiting for the rest of the presentation to see if there are some policies that are suggested. Thank you.
This is a timeline for the first goal. And then next goal being enhanced communication, collaboration, and flow of information. First objective being implement solutions to improve organizational communication. First task being to replace our existing VoIP solution, which is the phone system. We did make a request, I think, this fiscal year that didn't get approved. I think we'll be okay. At some point, our hardware is going to start to fail, so there will have to be a request to replace that, and so we'll probably have alignment on that timeline. Next is evaluate the city's current use of SharePoint and ECM solutions. So a problem I think we have is we do not have good collaboration tools for documents, and so that is a task that we need to work towards. Key objectives on data analytics, data quality analytics. I'm going to go into this a little bit more. This is probably could be another 30-minute conversation on each of those items. I do have kind of a separate strategic initiative that has alignment there. So I think I'll skip that for now and it'll come up later. Good. Timeline for that. Lastly is mostly security. So adopt and implement security best practices. So first objective being security strategy and management development. First task being adopt a security framework. This probably goes in line with what you mean from a policy standpoint of a security framework essentially is a checklist of things for us to do to make sure we're doing best practices. We have adopted and we're working towards completing what's called the NIST, and that will include all those policies you're talking about of unsupported. And it's something we recognize and we're working towards, and there's more complexities to talk about it, which I could go into, but that's kind of the policy solution you're looking for.
Just because anytime we're unsupported, we're at risk because we're not getting the latest updates. And usually there's a long lead time there. They'll tell you in 9 months we're going to no longer support this, or in 6 months, in 3 months you're no longer. So usually there's a lead time and to prepare. So it's good that it'll be part of our security strategy.
Yeah, I'll also say, when it says unsupported, it can seem more scary than it is, and it's something we do look to address, but it doesn't mean that that is an entry point for someone to hack us. It does mean that if that system did get compromised, it wouldn't be supported. We don't have any critical systems that are unsupported, so a lot of them are legacy things we need to migrate to new solutions. I could go into more detail if you'd like, but I just kind of saying it's not something you need to be horribly scared about, but we'll continue. So next is implement the 3-year recommended security roadmap. A lot of that is just aligning with the NSIT security framework. I was going to go into that, but I think I'll probably skip it for now. It gets very granular, and it's a lot of security tasks. Next key objectives being improved security infrastructure, so multi-factor authentication, which we've already implemented, log management and monitoring. So the idea behind this is that every time you take an action on your computer, it does log it to your computer, but we don't have a good system to be able to pull all those logs and do comprehensive searches on them. So we will look at trying to implement a software that can do that. Next is web application firewall, which is just an extra layer of protection. Vulnerability scanning, internal and external. So the idea, besides this one and the next one, are essentially getting an outside vendor to try to hack our system ethically to tell us where our issues lie. That's the timeline. These are the challenges with the strategic plan. I won't go into this. There will be a lot of things of like council funding, or if there's a bigger priority comes up. I think the idea behind this plan, that we're both probably in agreement that even if we think something's a good idea today, we know priorities could change in the future. So it can't be fully set in stone, even if it's something we both agree that should be executed. And then the last part of this document is vendor recommendations from an operations standpoint. I think a lot of this is staffing. And there's some I agree with and some I don't. And I'm going to try to cover this at a high level, because otherwise I'll have to get really granular. The first recommendation is that we change from IT to IS. The real implication there is there's a recommendation later to combine IT and GIS, and I'll talk about the reasons why. But that would help with the alignment, because then it's information services, and then GIS is already information services. I won't go into much. My preference is to stay IT, but I'll kind of leave that there unless you want to further discuss.
What is the position of the city administrator and assistant city administrator on that issue?
IT to IS?
Yes.
I'm hard pressed to see practically how that would really make a difference in terms of our overall mission and service to internal users.
If I heard Chris Randy correctly, I think that was based upon bringing the GIS underneath that umbrella. What's your perspective on the GIS piece?
The GIS piece, I think, has a more direct connection to community development, planning and development specifically. There are a number of layers within the GIS unit, if you will, once you go and look at everything they're responsible for with respect to housing and with respect to demographics and things of that nature. I'm not sure that the two need to be brought together, in my opinion. I think the functions are separate and distinctly separate, especially in an organization like ours, where IT has a responsibility for ensuring the systems and processes for software and hardware work efficiently, versus our GIS system, which is user-based, internally and externally user-based. And it has a stronger connection to land, property, development, etc. And again, in my opinion, I think those are two different and distinct separate entities and should remain so.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I just wanted to know what the bosses thought.
No worries. I think when I get a little bit deeper, I'll kind of propose my counter argument, if we will, and we could discuss further. But I do think there's like a strategic alignment that makes more sense. So anyway, we'll talk about it in a second. Next is a security engineer, which this has already been funded, so thank you. Thanks, guys.
You're very welcome. I think council deserves a bow.
About a round of applause.
They put into your pressure, your heavy pressure, Chris.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, that position will help significantly align with the security objectives defined earlier. I will say we've already made a lot of strides towards that, but thank you, guys. Next is an operations manager, which this one I would agree with and I would like. This would be a day-to-day manager more on the operational side that could free up me and kind of operate as a deputy in case I get hit by a bus to be able to, pick up after. This would help with the succession planning to have that direct line of succession, but significantly help on the operation side. I know that's not my main focus, and I dabble in it, and I don't think it's my strong point. So having someone to handle that and also manage the help desk, and to your point, the SLAs and those definement, that's what that role would serve as. Next is expand the help desk, which I actually don't think we need. I actually think we have great coverage and support here. So I'm not going to ask for that. Now, maybe as time progresses, if we adopt more responsibilities and things change, that might be an ask. But for the time being, I actually think, per the survey, we get great responses. I don't think we need more people. Network administrator, they basically saying we need an additional one. I believe with the security network admin, we'll fill a lot of the gaps mentioned that they mentioned here. Maybe in time my position will change, but I don't think we need that coverage. Next is a senior systems engineer. I actually like the idea of this. Right now we have one network admin, one system admin. We'll have our security admin starting in October, and that gives us coverage on the network side. I would like to have more coverage on the system side. Additionally, it allows that team to become more strategic instead of operational when we get that additional staffing. So that would be the request. All right, so we have the IT and GIS Department Realignment. I might go into this more a little bit later too, but I think my vision here is that the GIS manager is also the chief data officer, and I think the city has a need for strategic reporting. And I think when you put it in that confines, and I'll probably talk about this again in this presentation, I think that's where the alignment makes sense to me, because then you put the chief data officer closer to the data, and then I think that's where you could start to get strategic actionable reporting get leveraged more than this today. Again, I think I'll probably talk more about this. I have a specific initiative about strategic reporting later, but I do think this is a great conversation I would love to dig into. Lastly, a junior application developer. This one I snuck in. I have a part-time PC specialist who essentially operates as this position, and what they spend their time doing is finding processes and automating it. They also help with other tasks as well, but that's what I see the value of this position. This is where, from an innovation standpoint, no other city has an application developer. And part of that is because most cities outsource their work, and I think to have an application developer, you have to have someone with that background and understanding and that vision. And fortunately, I do. So I could leverage it and utilize it and figure out how to automate manual work. And that's, something I truly believe in. I'm not going to ask for any time soon. But I think the city would significantly benefit from someone who is looking at processes that could get automated. I think the return on investment is huge. I think the full extension, which I don't think I'd want.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, sir.
So sound logic, why not make that a higher priority if you believe there's a high ROI on that?
I think there is I think I want to build the confidence. And part of that is maybe I could do that today, and maybe I could convince you how important it is. I'd like to go at some point when I request this to say, here is all the work that this part-time college kid was able to do and reduce by, and then make that more of an argument to convince you, and you have the confidence in me in it and confidence in the position. That is why it's a little bit later, and maybe that should get moved up to your point, but at least that's kind of my thinking.
So that would be, I guess, one question I'd ask about the entire piece, and I've got kind of a separate question. But I think you have been establishing credibility and confidence with Mr. Knighton, Mr. Fisher, your colleagues, the council, certainly myself, throughout your tenure. Mm-hmm. And I have a macro question to ask you kind of in relation to that, because I think you've demonstrated great skill and competence, and the city is benefited from that. And that would be my kind of question, just from a macro perspective, is that's why we kind of stopped on the innovation piece. That to me is being innovative, mm-hmm. Right? When you say other cities don't have this, but look, what we can do with this is we can automate a lot of processes, which means we can be more efficient, save taxpayers money, mm-hmm. and create better results. that's being innovative. Those kind of things, I think, will resonate in terms of selling and getting done. That's just my 2 cents. I think that those are attractive things and make a lot of sense, and certainly would be things that I might prioritize from the standpoint of planning. I got a question for you, because, and this is not a fair question to ask, Chris, but you and I have spent a lot of time together, and I think very highly of you, and you are doing an outstanding job for the city, and this plan's a perfect example of it. And this is not a fair question, but you came here a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I don't mean this as a pejorative question towards anybody, but I mean this as an assessment question. So on a broad view, and I would say this, and these are never fair questions, but on a scale of 1 to 100, not 1 to 10, looking, when you came in, what would you have assessed our overall IT program at on a scale of 100? At that time, a year and a half ago.
I think I have to give you 2 answers.
Well, I want to get the answer today of what you look back and think of it was now, but when you
Understood.
came in.
Well, I still think I have to provide you the 2 answers to the front end, and I think you'll understand why. So if I talk about, and I think when we talk about the innovation and this position, in my view, and what's different, is I do think I come with a strategic vision that didn't exist and doesn't necessarily need to exist in this position. And so that's where I'm going to give you 2 answers of the operational side and then the operational and strategic side combined. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So from an operational standpoint, I think it was probably at an 80. And then I won't speak to the gaps. And then from a, holistic, strategic, and operations, I put it, I don't know, close to a 50.
Okay. And so now, same question with what you know now versus looking back a year and a half ago. What was it? Those two different answers.
Operationally, I'd probably say 85. I think it's gotten better, and why I think.
No, so you were better than you thought you were when you came?
Sorry, I thought you were asking what.
No, I'm going to get there. That's going to be the next question. So I want to know, knowing now what you know.
Got you.
What was ops truly?
Yeah, I'd put that at maybe 85. I think it was higher than I expected.
So ops was better than you thought it was. Now
Correct.
knowing what you know, 18 months later.
Correct, and I think I could speak to the why.
That's
The why.
okay.
Okay.
What about the holistic strategy piece?
Maybe a 35.
Okay, so it was worse. Now that you've learned what you've learned, it wasn't as good as what you thought it was.
Correct. I think from especially the strategic standpoint, and I would say vendor management was a big one there.
So where are we today on those same 2 questions?
I would say operationally, there's probably been some improvement, but maybe 88.
Okay.
And from the strategic and operational, I'd say 70 to 80.
70 to 80.
Yep. And I don't mind, again, you said this is not a fair question. I don't mind doing my best to answer an unfair question, so give me some leeway.
That's fair.
So let me speak to the why a little bit. So my team is very good operationally, and they know how to fix things way better than I do. And they operate very well autonomously. So that's where, there's been slight increases. Where I want to say operationally it's gotten a little bit better too, is now we have some process and procedures on how to do things that we've kind of eliminated duplicated work. And we could also look at some of the operational processes and come up with strategic solutions for them. But really, if I got hit by a bus and went back to, we're here to fix problems, my team would do a great job without me. They really would. Now, from the strategic perspective, I knew coming in day one, there was no policies, or procedures, or documents written, which basically enforces how we do things. So I knew that was a big problem. And then a second thing that kind of lowered my perception down the road is I thought our vendor management was okay. And then I kind of recognized we had some ingrained contracts that were bad deals that we needed to get out of. So that's why my perception was lower. And then why I'm rating us hire today, and I think, I really want to give a lot of credit to Mr. Fisher and Mr. Knighton and council as well, is you've talked about this a lot of if you want to change something, you can. Well, I feel like from almost day one, I've had that ability. And so, when we come up to these problems, often I don't need to come to you guys to talk about it. I just fix it, and my team fixes it, and we come up with these solutions. And so that's where, I know everyone's always going to have to improve, but I think just the kind of change in perspective and how we address things, that is where I'd kind of rate the overall value of the department much higher than originally. Does that make sense?
Chris, that's a great answer. Thank you. And so just to be clear for the record, Mr. Davidson as city attorney and Marley Press as city clerk don't deserve any credit for this. Let's just be clear about this.
I don't report to them directly. That's what I'm trying to get to is.
No, you deserve tremendous. No, your leadership has been fantastic, and I give you a hard time, but you're sharp. You get things done. You're innovative, and it's interesting. I just kind of get your purview so that our fellow residents can kind of get some insight to what a professional came into, what your perspective was about that same situation looking back, and what your perspective is about today. Of course, you know what the next question is, and that is, where are we going? And so you kind of skipped by the mission statement, which I agree is, but the real question is for our residents, and, is the efficiency of our government, right? How good do we deliver our goods and services, and how cost effective are we? And part of that is, there's so many pieces about that. But I think that's the next question people are going to want to know. So where are we going? What's it going to look like at a year and a half from now? How will we rate ourselves objectively?
Yeah, and to kind of your point earlier, and this might be me operating poorly, and that's why I like this working session. I don't mind admitting I could be doing something wrong and getting that feedback, is I tend to be pretty risk adverse, and especially when it comes to execution. So I'm not risk averse when it comes to coming up with ideas and seeing things and testing them out, but when I go, hey, there's an idea I like, I take a long time to make sure it's the correct thing before I'm like, okay, I'm ready to present it. So and I might not have an exact number, but I think I'll talk to the philosophy, and that might be more digestible, at least for me to speak to, is what I kind of see the next 2 to 3 years of my tenature and my department's, or my division, sorry, I always get them mixed up, objective is I kind of want to look internal and make sure we're doing everything we're supposed to, and a lot of that's on the security end, a lot of that's on the process end. I want to have documents to say what we do and why, and have that communicated well. And then at the end of that, I do, and some of this is strategic reporting, but I want to be able to sit down, and we are doing this today, but not to the degree I want to, with other divisions and departments, and say, hey, we need to understand your business process so we could help you find the tool to do your job better. So I think that's kind of the end vision of this, what we're working towards, what we've already started to do. But again, I'm very slow. I like to take it slow, make sure we're doing the right thing, but that's the end vision here. And if I had to rate, in the next 4 years, if we're able to do that, it's like 100. If we're in the city doing that, I feel like, today I might tell you, and I've got hubris, but you do too. We're probably the best IT department in Fulton. And the reason for that is we've got the management staff that allows us to innovate and allows us to correct things and allow us to make changes without the bureaucracy and questioning. And I've got a team that is behind the vision of we're going to correct everything that we can. There's no sacred cow. We fix what we could fix. If there's something wrong, we bring it up and we fix it. So I think that's the real value.
That is music to, let me say personally, my ears. One is I enjoy the hubris. The hubris usually has a position, and someone that has hubris usually has some reason to have hubris, and it's not hubris when you're telling the truth, which I think you are. And two is continuing to examine yourself in a very, very challenging way. And I think your own self-admittance earlier about some of the challenges is a great example of leadership. That's a great example of continually questioning thyself, questioning thy organization, and saying, look, what can I do better? Here's some of the things I'm great at. Here's some things I'm not so great at. I think that's a great example of leadership, Chris, and I think that's a reason why you are leading the best municipal IT department in Fulton.
Maybe in Georgia. I feel really
All right,
strong.
well, let's get some benchmarks. Let's get some benchmarks and get some KPIs so we can start demonstrating that.
Okay, understood.
That would help make the case.
I'm sure I could find the data and the way to present that. So
Okay.
I'll absolutely, come February, our
But it-
annual presentation.
Well, but you said it well, like your words were musical, which is, look, it's about being highly efficient as an organization, highly effective, highly efficient, highly accountable, and just so happens that we are representatives to our residents. So, we've got a lot of stakeholders. But our responsibility is to have a highly efficient, highly effective organization that continues to innovate and challenge itself.
And I mean, the great thing is the management staff here allows it. And that's really the value because, my random stupid ideas could just get crushed and then it's gone. So I really want to give credit where credit's due.
That's Mr. Fisher and Mr. Knighton, just to be
Absolutely.
clear.
All right, going on ahead. Last thing kind of categorizes the project area. It's not important. I'm going to skip through it. I have my proposed org chart. They had their people. I'm going to skip this. You'll see this in ZBB, right? You want me to go through this? I'd love to go through it.
I will just let you know that Mike Palermo, Christine Hall, and Lee Hills have already warned me that they will be stomping out of here fairly soon
Okay.
because of time constraints.
You'll see this in ZBB. I believe that part of the ask is you guys want to see people's proposed org charts. I'll do it then to make my argument then. The only thing I want to highlight is this idea of center of excellence. You're
You're talking about, yes. If that's going to be part of your proposal in ZBB,
Yep.
I love the acronyms. We're talking like government people now. Zero-based budgeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might want to save that. I would not do that to yourself right now. Don't eviscerate yourself today.
Okay. Sorry for the jargon. That's just what my old organization called it. I never thought twice. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. The only thing I'll bring up is this idea of center of excellence. And if you don't know what that is, a center of excellence, also called Excellence Center, is a team, a shared facility or entity that provides leadership, best practices, research support, or training for a focus area. So the idea is support goes down because technology improves. I believe, the staff here will look at what we talked about is reaching that handout, doing best practices. But we'll wait till ZBB. I'm going to skip the security roadmap just for time's sake. It covers a lot of what we saw earlier. Go ahead.
I think everybody might have an interest in security roadmap.
We could do it as a separate one if you guys like.
I'd like to do a separate security roadmap.
Okay.
Okay,
Can we do a separate security roadmap work session?
absolutely.
Mr. Knighton, is that okay with you, sir? Well, that's good. I mean, that is must-see TV.
Very good. I think it will be very boring, but I'm happy to speak to it. So
None of us are bored.
I'll keep it as boring as possible. This one I tried to make interesting. All right, the next section of this presentation, and I only have maybe 3 or 4 slides, I'll try to be quick, is I kind of want to talk about some strategic initiatives. Again, this plan is put together by a vendor who signs off. I think the nature means it's going to be pretty low risk, pretty generic things that all municipalities could probably accomplish. I want to kind of touch on some things as a division we're looking at and that we're trying to solve for outside of that, mostly to make this presentation a little bit more interesting. Before I do that, I kind of want to talk about approach, and I've talked about this a little bit, just so you know how I operate and how my team operates is, again, very risk-averse in execution, very risk-inclined in scoping, meaning we're going to look at every problem. When we figure out something's worth doing, we spend a lot of time figuring out how to do it before we do it, just to make sure we don't screw anything up. Focus on cost and quality. So we have this project management triangle. I think the thing is it says you can only pick 2 of the corners. I operate in this center section. I try to be high quality and I try to be best cost, which means I'm not always the fastest. I think that's the correct way to operate given me and maybe 2 other of my staff could stop all police officers from working in 2 seconds. It's that quick. So we like to be very slow before we do anything because of the power and control we have. This next bullet point I could talk about for 30 minutes. You're laughing at. Process before tool. So I am the IT director. My job is to recommend tools amongst many other things. However, I will never recommend a tool until the process has been defined. We could probably discuss and argue this for hours, but I at least want to say this is how I operate. We could talk about the reasons later. I also am very bottom-up approach to solve a specific, so what that means here is I try to solve a specific need for a specific division and department and then try to propagate that success. So I do not try to find a problem the city has and then implement a solution and then force everyone into it. I don't think you get good user buy-in and adoption when you do that. So instead, I like to work with the department and division, figure out their need, and then try to propagate that. All right, specific initiatives I want to talk about. I don't know how many I have, but I'll cover as many as I can. So the first is record retention. The problem we have here with a record retention strategy and storage is there is kind of a lack of understanding of how long people need to store things. So what happens is we store everything forever because no one wants to delete something they're not supposed to. And this causes two problems for the city. The first is I have no record of this happening, but whenever we get a FOIA request, we have to produce all documents of that type. And if we don't know exactly what we have and where, there is a possibility that something is requested that we don't produce because someone didn't know where it is. So that's the problem we're trying to fix. The second is if we don't have a comprehensive strategy to what we store, then we're just going to store everything forever, which becomes infinite, which leads to increased cost. So this is how we're trying to approach this. We worked with the clerk office to establish a comprehensive guideline on document retention. So we have that as of today where we'll say this document type needs to be stored for this long. We are now creating a folder structure and process for every user to be able to store those documents. And then eventually when they leave, we're going to send that to a central repository. The folder structure will automatically delete folders based off of the retention defined by that document type. And this is something we have in process trying to solve for.
So have we established a timeline of how long we keep documentation?
I have a document by the clerk's office that say by document type how long we should keep something.
And was that a policy created by mayor and council, or was that a policy created by IT or the city clerk? State, okay. And what is the timetable?
It is.
Is there any clarity to this, or is it as confusing as it sounds like you're answering it?
I would say before the great work of the clerk office, it was confusing. I believe I could give you a document today that will tell you exactly what you need to know. I think there's a lot in that document, but I think it is comprehensive.
How long is the document?
I think it's 20 lines of an Excel sheet. Sorry, not 20, 200.
How many?
200. Might be less. I'd have to double check, but between 100 and 200.
So different documents and different records have a different retention life. And so there are certain things that you can, I believe it's 5 years for certain documents, and then for other things, especially when you get into legal issues,
The IRS.
it's much longer.
And this is how recent is the legislation on this?
Long time.
So the legislation is very old, but the policy has changed through the years to address new technology, new kind of documentation.
But that's state legislation, correct? Then this 6 years old? 7 years old? Thank you.
Next, we're trying to solve project management tools, which as of today, we'd say the problem is we have ineffective project management tools and reports. We have outdated tools for project management. I think our tool of choice for the city is Microsoft Projects. I think there are more sleeker, efficient tools for doing project management. And then secondly, there's a problem with when there is a need to produce project status as a report. There's a manual effort to produce it, which creates two systems of truth. So I think overall the vision here is that we want to establish a tool that people operate out of and report out of, and that is true for both project status and project financials. So I'll kind of speak to how we're trying to solve this. So first, we're trying to work with a project management group within the city to establish what the process for project management is. I don't want to go into that too much because I think there's some limbo and got some ideas, but that's kind of the first objective. Work with HR and transportation to develop business requirements and use cases to select and implement a project management tool. So transportation is working with Atkins to develop a Power BI dashboard for project management reporting. So we're trying to come in and help them establish a better injection of that data. So instead of working out of Excel sheets, they work out of a project management tool, and that automatically goes into their Power BI. Next is,
What's the transparency of that? How transparent can we make that?
I think we could make it public. So the most transparent if you wanted.
Yes. How soon?
The challenge would be how you host it, but I certainly think the data could be available. I don't want to say almost immediately. There's more complexities here because I think the process needs to be defined, but I wanted to say to what you're specifically asking. Once the process is defined, once the tool and the idea is implemented, it would not be hard to take that data and make it available.
Can we do this with ComDev as well?
Sure we can. I think for me, to earlier, I'd like to solve it for transportation and HR and then propagate that success.
Why HR?
They had a need, so I was, aware that they had a similar need. The ComDev one, just not as aware of a problem to solve here.
Yes, I think transportation, ComDev are problems out there. There's a need for transparency to be able to see into the looking glass what's going on from a project management perspective.
Mm-hmm. And the second part of project management is financials, which we have a financial system today, so all that required is integrating the financial data to automatically pull in, and that's completed. So we have a centralized database that you could pull project data or financial data from. And then lastly is Power BI adoption. My objective is I think this would align to the Microsoft 365 budget request, the highest license included. That is kind of my recommendation and suggestion for strategic reporting. Next is ERP system. So in the strategic plan, they listed moving this to the cloud. Our ERP system is not specialized. I believe it takes a lot of manual work due to lack of functionality. And we also have all our eggs in one basket, so our solution does everything but not anything particularly well. Which that means for us is that it's really hard to get out of that environment because so much of our business processes are built into it. And we lack leverage when it comes to both support and contract negotiations. So the vendor recommended that we look to going to the cloud, but my approach, and with all these initiatives, it's kind of like, we're working through it. This one, it's like, I don't know if this will be successful, but this is kind of our approach and we're seeing how it goes. So my attempt here is that I want to look at modularizing components of Munis so we could get out of a one solution and instead look at getting individual solutions that are better where we have more leverage. And so now I'm working with HR to try to build that use case with the new HRIS. So we're in process for that. So eventually lead to a budget request, and part of that will be trying to present the value of it and the argument for so. So this one may not come into fruition, but this is kind of my objective. I think it's a better approach than just moving to the cloud version of our current ERP. And then lastly is strategic reporting. This one is near and dear to my heart. So employees are unaware of what data is available to them, and reporting with actionable data is underutilized. So our way to try to solve this is to build a centralized data warehouse with integrations from various systems. I'd say this is completed, although there's multiple systems we could add and integrate over time, but we do have kind of a foundation of that database. Request for a combination of GIS and IT to align to strategic reporting position with infrastructure control. We've talked about that before. We can talk about that a lot.
Since you're on that one, let me just go ahead and interrupt you. So one of the things, Chris, that obviously from my perspective, that would be gigantic in terms of strategic reporting, says employees aren't aware what data is available to them. Obviously, that's an organizational issue, which it needs to be addressed. But I would add is that residents are unaware of what data is available to them. Public officials are unaware of what data is available to them.
You know I ignore those.
I know. Yeah, I would say residents would be, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And I think that one will go broader than IT because I don't ultimately know who could see what. But from a visibility standpoint, yeah, I agree.
Well, that's a good question. So who would? If you don't, who does?
The way I would look at data is each division probably owns their own data set, so it's very easy for me to say, like if I take the financials, Ryan Luckett owns that. And if I'm to,
You just said something so illuminating. That is part of the problem. Say exactly what you just said a minute ago.
if it comes to financials data, I
You
would,
said each,
each division or department owns their own data set.
exactly. That's part of the problem. At some point, somebody's got to have ownership. You can't change the way you communicate until there's ownership. Somebody's got to have ownership of the piece. That's one of the challenges we have on this communication piece. We haven't solved for it yet, is that we don't have ownership, right? If everybody continues to be siloed, at some point, somebody's got to have ownership of how to deliver. That's why, for example, to me, like employees aren't aware that data's available to them, it's siloed, right? Same thing with residents. One of the things of being able to communicate, or residents being able to see have more transparency is, it's not that everybody's not trying to communicate, is we haven't figured out how to communicate because the information's siloed. So if you don't own that, who does own that?
Governance of data in general. Like in some extent, I think I agree with what you're saying, although if I take public safety as the other end, I think you would always want someone in the public safety department to review data before we publicized it, to say.
Yes.
So that's what I'm kind of saying with financials as well. There's some things I don't know what we can and can't show.
Yes.
And so just general good policy is always have a stakeholder kind of own a data set and approve when things get given out. Does that make
No, absolutely correct. I'm just saying, we have to solve for that.
Gotcha.
We're not solved. That equation has to be solved. That equation of how we communicate, where we communicate, when we communicate, and our ability to communicate comprehensively, that equation has not been solved, and it has to be solved. And you're a big part of that equation. Yeah. So, employees unaware of what data is available to them. Residents are unaware of what data is available to them. We got to change that.
Got my note. Okay, and I think I'm good here. You want to discuss anything here further? I think this is a big topic, but we only have so much time.
Can we put it back on another work session? Can you add it to another work session? What's your big topic?
We're here?
Yeah, which issue are you talking about? Which
Strategic reporting, I think, is a big thing we could spend a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, let's add it to a different work session. Yes.
Although the only thing I would say is I think this is probably like this I couldn't solve on my own. I've
No.
got my steps that I think will help.
You can, but you are a major stakeholder.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead. All right, last slide. These are just additional initiatives. I think I'm just going to skip them all. The only one I'll call out is the Verizon T-Mobile, which you're already aware of. So we're looking at switching our service for city phones from Verizon to T-Mobile.
I thought you'd already done that.
We're in a pilot group right now, and then at the end of this month, if everything's a go, then we'll start switching over beginning of October.
Add these additional initiatives, add this to the next work session, because we've got to roll. I'm sorry, forgive
Okay.
me. We're an hour and a half in, and Christine is kicking me underneath the desk.
No worries. Okay, that concludes, I think, everything I've
Questions? Councilmember Hills, any questions, comments? You want to save it? Councilmember Palermo? Well, yes. Councilmember Hall?
I'll save it for the next meeting.
Chris, thank you. Great job. We're so appreciative of you, appreciative of your team and everything you do. And thank you for allowing us to give you a hard time. We really do appreciate you. Mr. Knight, anything, sir?
No, sir, I don't have anything further.
Chris?
I did want to thank Chris and his team for the marvelous job that they do on a regular and daily basis. He obviously is very creative, very thoughtful, very erudite, and someone that, if given freedom and flexibility and latitude, will certainly develop excellent solutions. And so we want to continue to tap into his creative genius as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton, very much. Chris, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for the presentation. Well done. And we'll see you at the next work session. This ends our work session on information technology today. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
so
you, guys.
much. Thank you, everybody.